Good morning. We are about to start the very last section of the Jungle Book, stories that follow Mowgli and all of his animal friends. So we've heard about Mowgli's brothers, which covers when Mowgli is being raised up by the wolves, and then it ends with him actually leaving the wolf pack. He is no longer welcome there anymore, and he ends up going back to a village. Then we heard, going back in time, cause hunting, all about a specific instance of when he was taught by Baloo and Bagheera. Then he goes off on his own to the monkeys, the Banderlog, and we know what happened there. And now we're going to jump back to basically the ending of story 1. So he went back to the man's village. No longer welcomed by those wolves, right? They were starting to be fearful of him. And some of the wolves were siding with Shere Khan, and Shere Khan was starting to make them feel like they need to push Mowgli out, even though it hurt Mother Wolf very, very much. She loved him more than her own cubs, and Baloo and Bagheera are obviously very fond of Mowgli. But we're going to be starting our story at that point. He left the village, he left the wolf pack, went to the village. And how do you think he's going to fare with all of the humans? He was a baby the last time he was around other humans. So what's going to happen? And we also know that there is a prediction that he will come back for Shere Khan, who still hates Mowgli and wants to kill him. So we're going to continue on with that plot line as well. So in my book, we're going to start on page 73, the beginning of a story called Tiger, Tiger. Okay, starts off with a poem going like this. What of the hunting, hunter bold? Brother, the watch was long and cold. What of the quarry ye want to kill? Brother, he crops in the jungle still. Where is the power that makes you pride, made you pride? Brother, it ebbs from my flank and side. Where is the haste that ye hurry by? Brother, I go to my lair to die. Tiger, tiger. Now, we must go back to the first tale. That's what it says. When Mowgli left the wolf's cave after the fight with the pack at the Council Rock, he went down to the plowed lands where the villagers lived. But he would not stop there because it was too near to the jungle. And he knew that he had made at least one bad enemy at the council. Shere Khan is his enemy, as well as some of those wolf cubs who are following him. So he hurried on, keeping to the rough road that ran down the valley, and followed it at a steady jog trot for nearly 20 miles, till he came to a country that he did not know. The valley opened out into a great plain, dotted over with rocks and cut up by ravines. At one end stood a little village, and at the other, the thick jungle came down in a sweep to the grazing grounds, and stopped there as though it had been cut off with a hoe. All over the plain, cattle and buffaloes were grazing. And when the little boys in charge of the herds saw Mowgli, they shouted and ran away from him. And the yellow pariah dogs that hang about every Indian village barked. Now Mowgli walked on, for he was feeling hungry, and when he came to the village gate, he saw the big thorn bush that was drawn up before the gate at twilight, pushed to one side. Umph, he said, for he had come across more than one such barricade in his night rambles after things to eat. So men are afraid of the people of the jungle here also. He's thinking, how these people are afraid of the jungle animals. He sat down by the gate, and when a man came out, he stood up, opened his mouth, and pointed down it to show that he wanted food. Why do you think he's doing that, other than the fact that he wants food? He doesn't know how to speak. He can't communicate with other humans. He knows the languages of the animals, but that's it. The man stared at him and ran back up the one street of the village, shouting for the priest, who was a big fat man dressed in white with a red and yellow mark on his forehead. Now the priest came to the gate, and with him at least 100 people came with him. who stared and talked and shouted and pointed at Mowgli. They all think, what is this person who can't speak? And he's probably naked as well. They have no manners, these menfolk, said Mowgli to himself. Only the gray ape would behave as they would. So he threw back his long hair and frowned at the crowd. This naked little boy is looking at, well, not little boy anymore, he's like a teenager. And he can't speak, and he's just confused by them. What is there to be afraid of? Said the priest. Look at the marks on his arms and legs. They are the bites of wolves. He is but a wolf child run away from the jungle, which is true. But he's not actually, he wasn't in danger with the wolves. Now, of course, in playing together, the cubs had often nipped Mowgli harder than they intended. Like Baloo, giving him kind of a little spanking, and it actually was much harder than you would think for a human than it would have been for a young bear. So sometimes they would nip him harder than they intended, and there were white scars all over his arms and legs. But he would have been the last person in the world to call these bites, for he knew what real biting meant. He's got scars all over him, but he thinks that was just playing. Those aren't real bites. Are, said 2 or 3 women together. To be bitten by wolves, oh, the poor child. He is a handsome boy, too. He has eyes like red fire. By my honor, Mesua, he is not unlike thy boy that was taken by the tiger. Let me look, said a woman with heavy copper rings on her wrists and ankles, and she peered at Mowgli under the palm of her hand. Indeed, he is not quite unlike him, but he is thinner, and he has the very look of my boy. So this woman, Mesua, she lost her own child to a tiger, maybe Shere Khan, and Mowgli looks very similar to the son that she lost. Now the priest was a clever man, and he knew that Mesua was wife to the richest villager in the place. So he looked up at the sky for a minute and said solemnly, what the jungle has taken, the jungle has restored. Meaning it was taken from you, and now it's given back. Take the boy into thy house, my sister, and forget not to honor the priest who sees so far into the lives of men. By the bull that bought me, said Mowgli to himself, but all this talking is like another looking over by the pack. Well, if I am a man I must become. So the crowd parted as the woman beckoned Mowgli to her hut, where there was a red lacquered bedstead, a great earthen grain chest with curious raised patterns on it, 6 copper cooking pots, an image of a Hindu god in a little alcove, and on the wall, a real looking glass, such as they sell at the country fairs. She gave him a long drink of milk and some bread, and then she laid her hand on his head and looked into his eyes, for she thought that perhaps he might be her real son come back from the jungle where the tiger had taken him. Now, not realistic. Her own son has died. This Mowgli just happens to look kind of like him. I don't think in this story that it's trying to say that like Mowgli really was her child and they thought he was eaten by a tiger, but in fact, he was raised by wolves this whole time. Because it makes it seem like her son was not as young as Mowgli when Mowgli was taken away. But we don't know where Mowgli's real parents are. Now she gave him a long drink of milk and some bread, and then she laid her hand on his head and looked down into his eyes, for she thought perhaps he might be her real son, come back from the jungle. So she said, Nathu, oh Nathu. Now Mowgli's not the human, his name given by humans, but his name, but Nathu is the name of her son. Mowgli did not show that he knew the name. Dost thou not remember the day when I gave thee thy new shoes? She touched his foot, and it was almost as hard as horn. No, she said sorrowfully. Those feet have never worn shoes. But thou art very like my Nathu, and thou shalt be my son. So she realizes he is definitely not her son, but she's going to treat him like her son, like he's an adopted son. Now, Mowgli was uneasy because he had never been under a roof before. Remember, he has never, he's just always lived out in the jungle. He has lived in caves with the wolves, but this is very different. As he looked at the thatch roof, he saw that he could tear it out at any time if he wanted to get away, and that the window had no fastenings. So this gives him actually comfort because he can see, oh, I'm closed in, and there's a roof, there's windows, but if I needed to escape, I could. I could tear the roof, and I could open up those windows to get out if I needed to. What is the good of a man, he said to himself at last, if he does not understand man's talk? Now, I am as silly and dumb as a man would be with us in the jungle. I must learn their talk, he says. It was not for fun that he had learned, while he was with the wolves, to imitate the challenge of bucks in the jungle and the grunt of the little wild pig. So as soon as Messua pronounced a word, Mowgli would imitate it almost perfectly. And before dark, he had learned the names of many things in the hut. There was a difficulty at bedtime because Mowgli would not sleep under anything that looked so like a panther trap as that hut. And when they shut the door, he went through the window. Give him his will, said Messua's husband. Remember, he can never till now have slept on a bed. If he is indeed sent in the place of our son, he will not run away. So Mowgli's just going to sleep outside because he feels trapped in there. And it's because he feels like, oh, this is a panther trap. It's going to be the type of place where somebody could get me and there'd be no escaping, whereas he feels freedom outside. So Mowgli, one more comment about that, kind of opposite of what we would feel like. We feel probably safer indoors because there's a sense of protection, not just to the weather, but like protection from, like, if we were in a jungle, from the wild animals. That's what these villagers are thinking. But Mowgli trusts himself in to be able to run and escape and figure out his way around danger. He doesn't like that, the building that traps him in, basically. So Mowgli stretched himself in some long, clean grass at the edge of the field. But before he had closed his eyes, a soft gray nose poked him under the chin. Phew, said Gray Brother. Now he was the eldest of Mother Wolf's cubs, so kind of a brother to him. This is a poor reward for following thee 20 miles. Thou smellest of wood smoke and cattle. Altogether, you're like a man already. Wake, little brother, I bring news. Are all well in the jungle? Said Mowgli as he hugged him. All except the wolves that were burned with the red flower. Now listen. Shere Khan has gone away to hunt far off till his coat grows again, for he is badly singed. When he returns, he swears that he will lay thy bones in the Waingunga. There are 2 words to that. I also have made a little promise. But news is always good. I am tired tonight, very tired with new things, Gray Brother. But bring me the news always. Thou wilt not forget that thou art a wolf? Men will not make thee forget, said Gray Brother anxiously. Never. I will always remember that I love thee and all in our cave, but also I will always remember that I have been cast out of the pack. So Mowgli says, I will not forget you. I will not forget where I was raised. But I also know that I can't trust some of the wolves anymore because I was kicked out of that pack. And that thou mayest be cast out of another pack. Men are only men, little brother, and their talk is like the talk of frogs in a pond. When I come down here again, I will wait for thee in the bamboos at the edge of the grazing ground. Now, for 3 months after that night, Mowgli hardly ever left the village gate. He was so busy learning the ways and customs of men. First, he had to wear a cloth round him, which annoyed him horribly. And then he had to learn about money, which he did not in the least understand, and about plowing, of which he did not see the use. So he has to wear clothes. That's irritating. He doesn't know anything about money. Imagine he's never had to deal with that at all. And plowing, farming. He doesn't know anything about that either. He's scavenged and hunted, and that's how he's gotten always his food, just like the animals. Then the little children in the village made him very angry. Luckily, the law of the jungle had taught him to keep his temper, self-control. But when they made fun of him because he would not play games or fly kites, or because he mispronounced some word, only the knowledge that it was unsportsmanlike to kill little naked cubs kept him from picking them up and breaking them in two. So he knows the law of the jungle, that you can't kill little cubs. And basically, that's what he thinks of the other kids. That it's not fair to kill these young kids, even though he hates that they've just make fun of him all the time for basically not understanding regular human activities that they're used to. He did not know his own strength in the least. In the jungle, he knew that he was weak compared to the other beasts, or the beasts, the animals of the jungle. But in the village, people said that he was as strong as a bull. Does that surprise you? I don't find that very surprising. Remember, he's done all of these active things alongside the animals, and he is weak compared to them, but much stronger than any of the humans in the village. And Mowgli had not the faintest idea of the difference that caste makes between man and man. That means a social order. When the potter's donkey slipped in the clay pit, Mowgli hauled it out by the tail and helped to stack the pots for their journey to the market at Kaniwara. That was very shocking, too, for the potter is a low-caste man, and his donkey is even worse. So a potter, someone who just makes pot, would be much lower in the social rankings than Mowgli is as the son of a rich, wealthy family in the village. And the donkey is even lower in caste, and so that would not have been acceptable for most people. But he doesn't think about it. He just sees someone who needs help and helps them, which is really wonderful. Now, when the priest scolded him, Mowgli threatened to put him on the donkey too. And the priest told Messua's husband that Mowgli had better be set to work as soon as possible. And the village headman told Mowgli that he would have to go out with the buffaloes next day and herd them while they grazed. No one was more pleased than Mowgli. And that night, because he had been appointed, as it were, a servant of the village, he went off to a circle that met every evening on a masonry platform under a great fig tree. It was the village club, and the headman and the watchman and the barber who knew all the gossip of the village. And old Buldeo, he'll be important later, the village hunter who owned a tower musket, met and smoked. So Mowgli, he's going to be set to work, and he's working with these older men, including a man named Buldeo, who is the village hunter. Now the monkeys sat and talked in the upper branches, and there was a hole under the platform where a cobra lived, and he had his little platter of milk every night because he was sacred. And the old men sat around the tree and talked and pulled out the big hookahs, which are water pipes, till far into the night. They told wonderful tales of gods and men and ghosts, and Buldeo told even more wonderful ones of the ways of beasts in the jungle, till the eyes of the children sitting outside the circle bulged out of their heads. Most of the tales were about animals, for the jungle was always at their door. The deer and the wild pig grubbed up their crops, and now and again the tiger carried off a man at twilight within sight of the village gates. Mowgli, who naturally knew something about what they were talking of, had to cover his face not to show that he was laughing. He's hearing all these men talk about the animals as if they know them so well. But Mowgli, who really does know, can see when they were just putting on a show. While Buldeo, the tower musket across his knee, climbed on from one wonderful story to another, and Mowgli's shoulders shook. He's just laughing at these stories. Here's one of them. Now, Buldeo was explaining how the tiger that had carried away Messua's son was a ghost tiger, and his body was inhabited by the ghost of a wicked old moneylender who had died some years ago. And I know that this is true, he said, because Purun Das always limped from the blow that he got in a riot when his account books were burned. And the tiger that I speak of, he limps too, for the tracks of his pads are unequal. So this hunter, Buldeo, is saying that the reason the tiger limps, which is making it very clear that it's Shere Khan since Shere Khan limps. So he's saying the reason he limps is that there is the ghost of someone, this accountant, who is taking over the tiger's body and like living out through him. And that man had a limp, so that means this tiger is that man, which is very silly. True, that must be the truth, said the graybeards. All the older men are thinking, that makes sense, that's logical. Are all these tales such cobwebs and moon talk? Said Mowgli. That tiger limps because he was born lame, as everyone knows. To talk of the soul of a moneylender and a beast that never had the courage of a jackal is child's talk. So he called it out for a lie. He's saying, that's ridiculous. That tiger has always been lame. He's never been able to walk without a limp. What do you think Buldeo is going to respond with? He was speechless with surprise for a moment, and the headman stared. Oh ho, it is the jungle brat, is it? Said Buldeo. If thou art so wise, better bring his hide to Kaniwara, for the government has set 100 rupees on his life. Better still, do not talk when thy elders speak. Mowgli rose to go. All evening I have lain here listening, he called back over his shoulder. And, except once or twice, Buldeo has not said one word of truth concerning the jungle, which is at his very doors. How then shall I believe the tales of ghosts and gods and goblins, which he says he has seen? It is full time that boy went to herding, said the headman, while Buldeo puffed and snorted at Mowgli's impertinence. Now, the custom of most Indian villages is for a few boys to take the cattle and buffaloes out to graze in the early morning and bring them back at night. And the very cattle that would trample a white man to death allow themselves to be banged and bullied and shouted at by children that hardly come up to their noses. So the little kids apparently are much better off. They're not going to be trampled. The cows actually listen to them. So long as the boys keep with the herds, they are safe. For not even the tiger will charge a mob of cattle. But if they straggle to pick flowers or hunt lizards, they're sometimes carried off. So the people, young boys, have to stay with the herd, or else that's when it's dangerous. That's when it's touch and go, using our idiom. Now Mowgli went through the village street in the dawn, sitting on the back of Rama, the great herd bull. And the slaty blue buffaloes, with their long backward sweeping horns and savage eyes, rose out of their byres one by one and followed him. And Mowgli made it very clear to the children with him that he was the master. He beat the buffaloes with a long polished bamboo and told Kanya, one of the boys, to graze the cattle by themselves while he went on with the buffaloes. And to be careful not to stray away from the herd. Okay, I think we'll have to stop there. Yeah. Okay, so Mowgli, he is herding these buffaloes and cattle, and he's supposed to be pretty safe with them. He's got to keep with them, but this whole herd of cattle is frightening enough to even scare off a tiger. So keep that in mind as we get into our next section. We are going to continue reading. We left off on the bottom of page 81, and we'll pick back up there tomorrow. See you later. Bye.